Hello everyone, Wayne Motts, the President Emeritus and Historian at the Gettysburg Foundation, with my friend Dana Shoaf, the Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, and we're back at Gettysburg for a Gettysburg medical moment on behalf of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine and the Gettysburg Foundation. We're doing this together.
Yeah.
Dana, thanks a lot.
Hey, it's great to be here. So we're down in downtown, which is pretty cool. We're outside the Gettysburg train station, which is a foundation property, and as you're going to explain, probably a lot of people don't realize this was a pretty significant hospital center.
This is a really buzzing hub during and after the Battle of Gettysburg. And what some of the viewers may not know is this is actually the first Civil War field hospital in Gettysburg, because on June 30th, 1863, when John Buford of the Federal Cavalry arrived here at Gettysburg, he actually had some sick troopers and he set up a hospital in the Gettysburg Railroad Depot. Now, the depot was finished in March of 1859. The rail service came in here in 1858. This is the Hanover Junction Railroad right over here behind Dana and I. And folks, this is the end of the road. Lincoln had to give the Gettysburg Address in Gettysburg. He had to give it in Gettysburg because he can't go anywhere else.
Can't go anywhere else.
Dana, this is
it.
This is the end of the road here. And during the Civil War and during the battle, of course, at Gettysburg, this is going to be crucial to getting wounded soldiers out of Gettysburg, supplies into Gettysburg, dead soldiers out of Gettysburg, and getting people in here back and forth. This is under military control during the time of the battle. The railroad was cut east of town by the Confederates, was cut and not repaired until around July 9, 1863. So from July 9 forward, this is going to be trains coming right up to the building. And back in those days, you had to back up against the building.
And you were saying it's enlarged, right? That the building during the war is actually the larger square that you see.
Just the front part of it, and they actually called that the head house. So what you see on the back extension would have been added in the 1880s. This was an active passenger depot from 1859, the day it opened, to 1942.
Wow.
The last train that went out of here was December 31st, 1942, with passengers. Now, today, freight, of course, still goes by here. The Gettysburg Foundation acquired the building, and today we have a great 3D reality experience in there called Tickets to the Past, Unforgettable Journeys, and we profile 3 people that would have been in and around this building, including a nurse, Cornelia Hancock, Blanchard, who was a musician, Eli Blanchard in the Iron Brigade at Gettysburg. He worked in and out of that. And we also have Basil Biggs, African American who buried bodies. He would have been in and out of the train station delivering the bodies. But we're here for a special reason because, Dana, you brought an original artifact which has connection here to the Gettysburg train.
And I'll bring it up. So this is 3 weeks at Gettysburg, and this is a pamphlet that was written by a woman named Georgeanna Woolsey. And Georgeanna Woolsey was a nurse that worked in and around this railroad station for 3 weeks, hence the title of her book, 3 Weeks at Gettysburg. Now, the book was actually, she came back from this experience and she published it. She was here on behalf of the Sanitary Commission, who were sort of running the operations here at the depot. And Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the head of the Sanitary Commission, was so impressed with her account that he ordered it reprinted. And this one we have, as you see, was published by the Cincinnati branch, but other branches reprinted it as well. And it was sold to raise money for the Sanitary Commission and raise awareness of the work that they did. Now, Georgiana is very interesting, and during the war, there are about 20,000 women that serve as nurses for the Union and about the same number for the Confederacy. It's astounding to think that there are no nursing schools that exist before the Civil War. And these women kind of do this on their own accord. And before the war, Nursing was not considered a proper profession for women. It was too indelicate. You know, you would see nude men, etc., etc. It was too graphic, but these women break convention and become an essential part of the medical workforce and caregivers during the war. They saved a lot of lives, and in turn, a lot of them will die themselves from disease or illness or exhaustion. Georgeanna will survive, and just before we get into what she experienced here, a brief background on her. She's born in 1833 in New Haven, Connecticut. She's about 28 when the war begins, about 30 years old when she's here. And she, her father had died, and her mother raised 6 daughters. And all of them, including her mother, were active during the war as nurses or raising money or giving supplies, that sort of thing. And Georgiana's dad was a wealthy industrialist, so they were pretty well off money-wise. What's interesting about a lot of nurses, I think on both sides, you know, if you're a farm wife in central Pennsylvania with 2 kids, you can't go become a nurse, right? So a lot of the women that go nurse are upper or middle class. Many of them are single, and they can afford to go away for a period of time. There are also many of them are educated because of their backgrounds. So there are a lot of nursing accounts that are left, and they're very vibrant. And there's big books and small pamphlets like this that tell their experiences. Georgianna, before Gettysburg, had a lot of medical experience. She'd been on a hospital ship. She had helped run a ward of a Portsmouth hospital in Virginia. And she works throughout the entire conflict as a nurse after Gettysburg. By the time the war ends, she's very sick. She's at the Grand Review of the Armies, but she's so ill she can't really stand. She will survive, go back. She will marry, check my notes here, Dr. Francis Bacon, who had served as a Union surgeon during the war. She will marry and then go on to found a Children's Aid Society and a nursing school in Connecticut before she dies in 1906. And very briefly from her obituary, that was in the New Haven papers, it says that the deceased, was a woman of marked intellectuality and of marvelous executive ability, and had a legion of friends who loved her for her gentleness and charity. She had not been in good health of late years, but Friday night had attended a dinner and seemed, for one of her years, to be quite active. The next day, she died while reclining upon a lounge. She passed away. Wow. So she came here about a week after the battle, and as you were mentioning, the railroad was a mess. Yeah. And she said it took us a day to get here from Baltimore, 24 solid hours to travel here, lots of delays. She will be an agent of the Sanitary Commission, that civilian organization that helps the Union Medical Department, and they are based here at the depot. And it's fascinating because their job is to provide food and comfort for soldiers that are being sent here to get shipped out to hospitals. And we've heard about the Jonathan Letterman 3-stage plan. And the first stage is triage on the battlefield. And then you go to a field hospital and you get the surgery done. Right. And when you're well enough, then you're transferred to a permanent hospital. And that's what's happening here. These guys are coming here because they're well enough to be shipped out to hospitals in Baltimore and Philly. And what was the hospital in Philly you said was a real big one?
Satterley General Hospital. It's one of the big ones here. Yeah.
And so she comes here and she talks about she arrived at the Sanitary Commission Lodge. And you said that this was fascinating to me. That was a building that stood here. It was a Masonic
there was a warehouse. So she's probably talking about the warehouse, the Sheeds and Beeler warehouse. Okay. Which stood just north of the railroad track. She also talks about setting up like in a field, right?
Yeah, this was much more open at the time of the battle.
Exactly.
And behind the camera is a big open parking lot where they have a farmer's market, actually. But it was open fields here. Yeah. And so they set up a tent. And I'll read you from her account what they set up here. We moved up to the depot close by the town and had things in perfect order. A first-rate camping ground in a large field directly by the track. Yep. With unlimited supply of delicious cool water. Here we set up 2 stoves with 4 large boilers, always kept full of soup and coffee, watched by 4 or 5 black men who did the cooking under direction and constantly sang, not under direction, at the tops of their voices all day. She has high regard for the African-American workers that worked here, and she talks frequently about how kind they were, how hardworking they were, and how they sang a lot. And she would attend some of their church services. I should mention her family is strongly abolitionist, so she was very positive. We set up 3 large hospital tents, holding about 35 men each, in a large camp meeting and supply tent as well, where barrels of goods were stored, and our own smaller tent fitted up with tables, where jelly pots and bottles of all kinds of good syrups, blackberry and black currant, stood in rows. Barrels were arranged around the tent walls, shirts, drawers, dressing gowns, socks, and slippers, of which I had more. Rags and bandages, each in its own place on one side, and on the other, boxes of tea, coffee, soft crackers, tamarinds, cherry brandy, etc. So, as it was during the war, this is a very busy place, so we're getting a lot of traffic and noise here. But they set up these large tents here and began cooking furiously to provide nourishment for these guys. And she will mention how some of them come in ambulances,
right.
Some come in farm wagons, and she said some come in helped by their buddies. They come in all different
right.
Directions. There were trains that left at 10 in the morning and 5 at night. And so the job of Woolsey and her comrades here was to provide shelter for those men and nourishment, and that's what they did. So she has a number of experiences here. She talks about, let me flip the channel. And it's interesting how these nurses sort of operate on their own hook. She said pads were in short supply. And that meaning pads to put under injured limbs. Mm-hmm. So they made their own. She said we collected rags and we used sawdust from brandy and whiskey casks that we then packed and made rags with.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And she said water was in short supply as well, so we would wash all the whiskey and brandy bottles, wash them out, fill them with water, and then hand them to the men to take with them on their cars as they were shipped out of here. So, yeah, she has a lot of stuff. One of the favorite things she said that people really liked, one of our favorite things that we issued out was warm milk with whiskey and sugar. I mean, I would try that.
Now, you told me that she made how many meals? Because you told me, and it was shocking, the number that you told me that she made.
They were here for 3 weeks, and she estimated they served 16,000 meals in 3 weeks.
16,000 meals.
Yeah. Yeah, and she said every night there were between 60 and 100 men that got here after the 5 o'clock train had left, and they would have to wait until the next morning, and so they would have to provide for them. It's interesting. She has great stuff to say about Gettysburg women. Talks about how tough they are and how strong they are and self-sufficient. She does not have good stuff to say about Gettysburg farmers, the men. And she relates this account. She said about 3 weeks after the battle, a local farmer came to the station and he wanted to see rebels. That's how she referred to them. See the rebels that were here. So she obliged them and took them to a tent where Confederates were located.
Wow.
And he walked in and she said, this man is here and he wants to see rebels. And of course, all these wounded Confederates start hooting and hollering at this guy and making fun of him. And he kind of turns red and he leaves the tent. And she says to him, if you wanted to see rebels, why didn't you fight and join the army? And he said, well, according to her, he said, well, you could get hurt doing that. So, yeah. But she says she has some other great vignettes of the town. She said that there were piles of muskets throughout the town that were being collected on the street corners. Yeah. Kids were going around with hammers popping percussion caps, just like kids with cap guns today. They're popping caps, and some kids got really injured doing that.
That's right.
And that also, she said, it seemed like almost every private home had a little red flag where some wounded soldier was being held. Yeah. And as she put it, there was a colonel in a shoe shop a captain just up the street, and a private round the corner. You know, just all through the town.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Woolsey recounts an interesting incident she has related to a Confederate officer who's brought here. And he's brought in here, and I find it interesting the way she writes this. She really builds this story inside her account. She's a good writer, and she kind of builds it and draws you through this incident. And she said this young man was brought in, a fair-haired, blue-eyed young lieutenant. And she said he could have passed for any brave New England boy. Okay, so she makes that connection. And he's laying here somewhere outside of the depot, and another Confederate hobbles by and recognizes this guy who's kind of comatose. He's not really focused on anything. And he starts to say, Henry, Henry. And Woolsey sees this and says, do you know this man? He said, yes, I do. He is our officer. He was a lieutenant in the 14th South Carolina. Now, that regiment's pretty well shot up July 1, correct?
That's right. That's out at the seminary. It's Abner Perrin's brigade.
So he's in that regiment, and I do recall the colonel of that report saying they were hit by enfilading artillery fire, and when they reached a certain point, he said, we received a volley that just staggered our regiment. They suffered a lot of casualties there. So maybe he was hit there. It's hard to say, but he's brought here this young lieutenant named Henry, and this other Confederate says his brother is on the railroad cars right now. So Woolsey finds the brother, has him brought off the cars to lay with Henry.
Wow.
Okay? So these two brothers are laying here, and she said that Henry never really responded. He was too far gone. Yeah. And she watched him slowly sink, and then, he passed away. And she said, our men took him and buried him in a field not far from the depot, somewhere out here. And she said on that grave, they placed a temporary headboard, Lieutenant Rouch, 14th South Carolina Volunteers. So his name was Henry Rouch, R-A-U-C-H. She could have told us that from the beginning. They buried Henry Rouch somewhere out in these fields.
Yeah.
And we don't know where he rests today. If you go to find a grave, you can find his brother and his other family members, but I'm guessing that he was exhumed by one of the weavers, Rufus Weaver, in the 1870s, and he may be in an unmarked grave in Richmond, Hollywood Cemetery, or somewhere in the South. So what I find interesting is she's from an abolitionist family, and she decides to talk at length about a man from South Carolina with the highest slave population in the United States before the war. And I think what she's doing here, in her own way, she connects him to New England. He could have been a New England boy. She's saying this is an American tragedy. We're losing young men all throughout the country. And she's also telling people the Sanitary Commission takes care of both sides. Yeah. That's one of the things she's doing. And she will mention as well that they also issue clothing here, which was a white shirt and white trousers of cotton to Union men if they needed it, because a lot of these guys are still in the clothes that they were wearing when they were shot or injured. She said, we don't really give that to the Confederates. We don't have enough of it, but we give the Confederates equal measures of care and food that the Union men get. So that is in general the tenor of her memoir, and it's a really vivid account of what happened here. And people probably don't think of that, right? A lot of people come and eat at the Lincoln Diner over here. This was a major depot full of wounded men getting out of here until toward the end of July, when Camp Letterman opened, and that's when they started to wrap up operations here.
Dana, what a fascinating story for the viewers. Georgeanna Woolsey, later Georgeanna Woolsey Bacon.
Yeah.
3 weeks at Gettysburg. A short pamphlet regarding what happened here as a worker of the Sanitary Commission during the battle.
And it's been reprinted, and you can also find it online at for public use. You can read it online.
All right. Listen, we want to thank you on behalf of the Gettysburg Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
The National National Museum of Civil War Medicine for coming out, partnering with us on these Gettysburg Medical Moments, partnering with us on the Gettysburg Medical Moments.
Right.
We really, really appreciate it. So we hope you enjoyed this. You got to follow the social media channels of both places. So if you haven't already, get over and subscribe.
Like and subscribe to both. Yeah.
On both sides, National Museum of Civil War Medicine,
Right.
and Gettysburg Foundation.
Come visit our museum. Come visit the foundation properties.
Yeah, and we've got our venue back here. You can check on the website, Tickets to the Past, Unforgettable Journeys as well, inside the Lincoln train station.
Well, I hope people enjoyed it. I love talking about it, and I look forward to doing more Gettysburg Medical Moments.
Thank you.